You have read the words living water dozens of times in John chapter 4. Most people assume it simply means water that refreshes, water that satisfies a physical thirst on a hot afternoon. But in Hebrew, this phrase already existed centuries before Jesus ever spoke it to that woman at the well. It was not an ordinary expression. It was tied to purification, to holiness, to the very presence of God himself. And there is one detail in this story, hidden in plain sight, that almost no English translation fully explains. A prophet had already used this exact phrase generations earlier, warning God's own people about something they had quietly walked away from. When you understand what Jesus was truly saying to her that day, this familiar story will never sound the same again. That prophet's warning is only the beginning of what this phrase was carrying. Because in the world Jesus and this woman came from, water was never just water. It was survival, yes, but it was also a symbol woven into worship, law, and identity. To understand what happened at that well, you first have to understand what living water meant to the people who first heard it, long before a Samaritan woman ever carried her jar there at noon. Most readers move through this story focused on the conversation itself, the questions, the tension between a Jewish teacher and a Samaritan woman, the surprising details about her past. What tends to get missed is the weight sitting underneath a single phrase Jesus chooses deliberately. He does not simply offer her a drink. He offers her something with a specific name, a name that would have carried centuries of meaning to anyone raised in that world, even someone standing outside the boundaries of formal religious life. This matters because Scripture rarely repeats a phrase by accident. When the same specific wording shows up in different places, written centuries apart, by different voices, it is worth asking why. This is one of those moments. The phrase Jesus uses at this well does not appear here for the first time in the story of God's people. It has a history, and that history quietly reshapes everything that happens in this conversation. Here is why so many readers miss it. Translation smooths things over. Once a phrase crosses from Hebrew into Greek and then into English, much of its original texture disappears. What remains sounds pleasant, even poetic, but flattened. The specific images tied to purification, to sacred cleansing, to the picture of water flowing rather than sitting still, rarely survive the journey into modern language. So the phrase becomes a nice metaphor instead of the loaded statement it actually was. What we are going to trace in this video is not a new interpretation layered onto the text. It is the original meaning this phrase already carried before Jesus ever spoke it. The meaning the woman would have recognized instinctively, and the meaning that connects a conversation at a well in Samaria to a warning spoken generations earlier by a prophet standing in front of a nation that had wandered from its source. If you're fascinated by hidden layers of Scripture and biblical discoveries most people overlook, subscribe to the channel and join us on this journey through the Bible. Stay with us until the end, because the final piece of this puzzle changes everything. To understand this phrase, we have to go back to a moment most people never connect to this well. Long before Jesus sat down beside it, a prophet named Jeremiah delivered one of the most piercing accusations in the entire Old Testament. He spoke on behalf of God, addressing a nation that had wandered far from where it started. And the image he chose was not abstract. It was physical, something every person listening could picture immediately. God, through Jeremiah, describes himself as a fountain, a living source of water that never stops flowing. Then he describes what his people had done instead. They had turned away from that fountain and built their own containers, cisterns carved into rock, meant to hold water collected from rain or runoff. The problem was not that they built containers. The problem was that the containers were cracked. Whatever they poured in slowly drained back out. This image would have been instantly familiar to anyone living in that region. Cisterns were common, especially in places without a natural spring nearby. A broken cistern was not a rare accident. It was a known frustration, a container that promised to hold water but failed at the one task it existed for. Jeremiah uses this everyday disappointment to describe something much deeper, a spiritual reality hiding inside a mundane household problem. What makes this connect so directly to the woman at the well is not just the shared vocabulary, it is the shared condition. She has spent years returning again and again to a physical well, drawing water that will run out by morning, just as her ancestors kept returning to broken containers that could never actually hold what they needed. The well itself becomes a quiet echo of the very warning Jeremiah gave centuries earlier. This is where the phrase Jesus uses begins to carry real weight. He is not introducing a brand new idea to her. He is stepping into a conversation that had already been going on for generations, one about sources and containers, about what actually satisfies and what only appears to. When he offers her something called living water, he is placing himself directly inside that ancient warning, though she has no way yet of knowing exactly how. What she does understand, immediately, is that this water is somehow different from anything the well itself can provide. She asks him where he intends to get it, since he has nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Her question is completely reasonable. But it also reveals that she is still thinking about water the way she always has, as something you carry, something you draw and store, something with a jar attached to it. Before we go further into the conversation itself, there is a detail about the setting that changes how the entire scene should be read. This meeting does not happen in the morning or the evening, the hours when women in that culture typically gathered at wells together. It happens at noon, the hottest and most exposed hour of the day, when the task of drawing water was least comfortable and least social. This detail is easy to skip past, but it tells us something important about the woman before she says a single word. Wells were gathering places. Drawing water was communal, done in groups, accompanied by conversation and shared routine. Coming alone, at the hour least likely to overlap with anyone else, suggests a woman who has arranged her life around avoiding people rather than being near them. As the story unfolds, we learn why. She has been married 5 times, and the man she is currently with is not her husband. In that world, this history would have followed her everywhere, whispered about, judged, remembered by everyone she might otherwise share a well with. So she comes at noon, when the well stands empty, when there is no one there to look at her with the weight of that history in their eyes. This context reframes the entire exchange. When Jesus speaks to her, he is not simply crossing a boundary between 2 ethnic groups with historical tension, Jew and Samaritan. He is choosing to sit and speak directly with the one person at that well who has spent years making sure she would never have to be seen there by anyone else. He finds her in the exact place she has chosen specifically because it is invisible. And this is where the phrase living water begins to carry an emotional dimension alongside its historical one. He is not only referencing Jeremiah's warning about a nation that wandered from its source. He is speaking directly into the private exhaustion of a woman who has tried, relationship after relationship, to find something that would finally hold, something that would finally satisfy the thirst she carries to that well every single day. The water jar in her hands is not just a household object at this point. It has quietly become a symbol of everything she's been doing her whole life, drawing from source after source, hoping this time the water will last. And she does not yet know that the man sitting across from her is about to describe exactly that pattern back to her, without ever once naming her past out loud. Here is where all of these threads finally come together. Jesus tells her that whoever drinks from this well will grow thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water he offers will never thirst in that same way. At first glance, this could sound like a simple contrast between physical and spiritual thirst. But once you understand everything sitting underneath the phrase living water, it becomes something far more precise. He is not describing 2 different kinds of water. he is describing two different kinds of sources. One is a well, dug into the ground, filled slowly, drawn from repeatedly, requiring constant return. The other is a fountain, the very image Jeremiah used centuries earlier to describe God himself. A source that does not run dry because it does not depend on being refilled from outside. It simply flows, continuously, from within. This is the moment the woman's entire pattern of life is quietly named without ever being spoken directly. 5 marriages that could not hold. A relationship in her present that still leaves her thirsty. A daily walk to a well that only ever offers temporary relief. Every one of these has functioned like Jeremiah's broken cistern, something built with the hope of holding water that ultimately could not keep it. And Jesus is not condemning her for any of it. He is offering her something else entirely, an invitation back to the very fountain her people had wandered from generations earlier. He is placing himself quite directly as the source Jeremiah had described, the one thing capable of satisfying a thirst that no jar, no well, and no relationship had ever managed to hold. What happens next is the detail that confirms she understood exactly what was being offered. She leaves her jar at the well and goes into the city to tell others about him. This is not a small narrative detail. This is the woman who came alone, at noon, specifically to avoid being seen, suddenly walking directly toward the people she had spent years avoiding without the very object she had carried every single day of her life. She no longer needs the jar because she is no longer drawing from the well the same way. Something has shifted at the source itself. The container that once defined her daily routine and quietly symbolized every failed attempt to fill herself from the wrong place is simply left behind, forgotten in the presence of something that finally does not run dry. What this story reveals, once the full picture comes into focus, is not just a lesson about a woman at a well 2,000 years ago. It is a pattern that stretches across Scripture, from a prophet's warning about broken containers to a quiet conversation at noon that ends with an empty jar left behind. The phrase living water was never simply about physical thirst. It was always about the difference between a source that depends on being refilled and a source that never stops flowing. This changes how the rest of the story reads. The woman's shame, her isolation, her carefully arranged routine to avoid being seen, all of it becomes part of a much larger picture about where people go looking for something to hold them, and how often those places quietly fail. Her story becomes less about one woman's past and more about a pattern nearly everyone recognizes somewhere in their own life. It also reframes what Jesus is actually doing in this conversation. He is not correcting her theology or listing her mistakes. He is naming, gently and precisely, the exhausting cycle of returning again and again to something that was never built to hold what she needed, and offering her access to the one source that was. The next time you read this passage, the well itself will look different. It will no longer simply be the backdrop for a conversation. It will stand as a symbol of every place people return to, hoping this time it will be enough. Set directly beside the offer of something that finally does not run dry. This is the kind of detail Scripture holds quietly, waiting for someone to notice the connection between a prophet's warning and a conversation at a well. Once you see it, you cannot read this story the same way again. If this changed the way you understand John chapter 4, tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most. These are the layers we love uncovering together, and there is always another one waiting in the text.